After making videos about Tetris for half a decade on YouTube, it's surreal that there's a full-length feature film about the game, and that I get to review it. But the surprising thing is, the game Tetris itself hardly appears in the film. And although the game's creator Alexei Bajitnov, that I actually got to meet back in 2019, is featured in the film, he's not the main focus either. The protagonist is actually Hank Rogers, the guy who traveled to the Soviet Union in the 80s to secure the rights for Nintendo to distribute Tetris worldwide, specifically with the Game Boy, and who also eventually founded the Tetris company. I was first introduced to this story many years ago through the Gaming Historian's video about it, and it was really cool to see that story come to life in the film. So in this review, I'll be talking about 1, is the movie good, 2, is the movie accurate, and 3, would I recommend it? And just as a heads up, there will be inevitable mild spoilers, but I'm not going to ruin the whole film for you. You're probably already aware that Tetris did in fact eventually get out of the Soviet Union. It's about the journey, not the destination. So, is the movie good? In short, yeah. The cast is headlined by the talented Taron Egerton, and there's a lot of great performances. The screenplay has to juggle a lot of characters, but does so in a cohesive way, making a clear-to-understand story out of a complex legal negotiation. The film doesn't look cheap either. It's a full-on Hollywood production that's doing a period piece of the 80s-era Soviet Union. And even in places where the film's budget was limiting, the filmmakers found creative workarounds. For example, all the 8-bit graphics, which are one of my favorite aspects, weren't even in the original script. The only reason they're there is because with the establishing wide shots in cities, it was either inconvenient or impossible for the filmmakers to travel around the world and get all the shots necessary in Russia, the US, Japan, etc. So instead of just going the lame route and resorting to stock footage, they decided, hey, let's do the establishing shots in 8-bit style. And it totally worked. The film checks all the boxes it needs to check, and I can totally see why it was quite positively received by critics, getting over 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now with that being said, there's not a lot of subtlety in the characterization. The film starts out with Hank talking to a banker who hams it up like, you want a loan for $3 million? Are you crazy, boy? And it just kind of sets the tone from there. Hank Rogers smooches his way through many situations with all the pizzazz of Saul Goodman, at one point saying to the Russians, this isn't even about the money anymore, it's all about showing that the Soviet Union is more than just military might and muscle. To which Belikov and the KGB just laugh, cause, I mean, come on. It's still totally about the money, let's keep it real. And the style may come across as melodramatic at times, but when I think about my own process of making videos, you know, I get it. The way I script my videos about the competitive Tetris scene often includes more simple explanations and emotive writing than I would use if I were talking to other people in the Tetris scene who already know a lot of this stuff. But my videos aren't just made for people in the Tetris scene. I'm constantly trying to write things in a way that would be accessible to someone who has no background knowledge whatsoever. In the same way, the filmmakers aren't trying to make an art house piece. They're making a film for the masses, the same way Tetris is a game played by the masses, and in that, they definitely succeed. So now let's move on to number 2, is the film accurate? Let's start out with 2 things that aren't essential, but productions like this always have to make a decision on, are we going to put forth effort into this or not? One thing the film did right, and the other they kind of face-planted on. The thing they did right is language. The film has a lot of non-English dialogue in it, and they got actors who can actually pull it off. The president of Nintendo is portrayed by a Japanese-born actor. Alexei Bajitnov and other crucial Russian roles are portrayed by Russian-born actors. And another one is played by a Ukrainian who speaks Russian. So the foreign dialogue sounds authentic. It's an unnecessary detail to get right, as most people watching will just be English speakers, but it's a cool bilingual bonus. Now the category the movie failed at is technical details. Many people on my Discord server were quick to point out the numerous inaccuracies with the gaming systems and versions shown of Tetris and other games featured. A Japanese Famicom game at an American show on an IBM Tetris on the Famicom with Game Boy sound effects. At one point they talk about Zelda and Link, but instead just show 2 Links in a game that doesn't exist yet at the time. These kinds of errors basically come down to the prop department and later on editors who are tasked with getting assets for the film that would look right to the average person. And they either don't have the rights to the right stuff, can't find it, don't know any better, or just don't consider it worth the effort. I think it's a combination of the last 2. Given that when Hank Rogers mentions Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, it appears that in order to get stock footage, the editor just searched the game on YouTube and grabbed a clip from the channel Game Grumps, given the signature orange letterboxing. It's good to know that at least one feature film editor gets their stock footage the same way us YouTube video essayists do. But generally in these kinds of cases, messing up technical details is tolerable. For people who do have intricate knowledge of the subject matter, it's a bit cringe whenever you spot a mistake, but most people are never going to notice stuff like this, and it's not that important in understanding the story. The YouTube version of this is like when I watch Rob Scallon's Tetris on the Nintendo video, and I see stuff like this. Those aren't level 28 colors, Rob! But do the level colors actually affect what the video is trying to do in any meaningful way? No, not really. But now, speaking of the story itself, the thing the entire film hinges upon, is that accurate? When thinking about this film, my first thought was that for the people portrayed, it must be so weird to watch a movie about yourself. And Hank acknowledges this.
I was blown away by the movie. I guess there's not many people who had a movie made about their life while they're still alive.
So what does the man himself have to say about the final product?
I would say 70-80% of the stuff that happens in the movie never happened in real life.
No, don't tell people that.
The guy who's playing me looks nothing like me.
Well, that doesn't give a great first impression. But here's the surprising thing. A lot of the pivotal plot points of the film are actually based in truth, more than audiences might expect. Hank convincing Nintendo to ship the Game Boy with Tetris instead of Mario actually happened. Hank traveling to the Soviet Union to get Tetris rights with a fraudulent tourist visa and putting himself at risk of arrest actually happened. Some of his opponents, the Maxwells, going so far as to try to get Gorbachev, the freaking leader of the Soviet Union, involved actually happened too. Alexei and Hank in a high-speed car chase across Moscow being chased by the KGB? Not so much.
There's a freaking car chase in there.
Do you remember that in your life, the car chase?
There was never a car chase.
He's a terrible driver. He wouldn't fit through the car.
But broadly speaking, the story the film tells did happen. And honestly, one of the things the film did far more effectively than the story of Tetris Video was conveying the emotional tension during the negotiations and the fear and danger that the Soviet setting had.
I was definitely there breaking the law. So was he by talking and so on and so forth. And, when we got down to the negotiation, we could feel the pressure from the Politburo.
I think what Hank means when he says most of the film never happened is that a lot of specific conversations portrayed did not happen, or at least they were nothing like that. Although they may be based on true elements that happened elsewhere in the timeline and worked better being portrayed at that point in the narrative.
They took a year and a half of our lives and squeezed it into 2 hours. The things that were happening in real time took longer. And to get that across to the audience, they had to squeeze them into little bits and pieces. I think they did a fantastic job of getting the feeling across.
I think a great example of this is the scene in Moscow where Hank ends up meeting Alexei at his apartment for the evening. The film portrays them spending the night playing around with Alexei's original version of the game, with Hank inventing the concept of clearing more than one line at once and Alexei adding it to the game on the spot, thus making the concept of a Tetris line clear possible. In real life, of course, Hank did not invent that. The original version of Tetris could clear more than one line at once. And what Hank and Alexei actually did in real life was not really as suitable for the film.
Well, I tell you what, the drunkest I ever got anywhere was Moscow. I remember going to the house of the guy who created Tetris, and we drank the Russian version of cognac. So we're pounding these little like cognac, and we got through the bottle. We emptied the freaking bottle, and then he breaks out the vodka, and then we start drinking vodka shots. Oh man, you have no idea. And then at the end of that wasn't enough. He says like, "Hey, I have some straight alcohol." I said like, he said, "Yeah, I used it to clean my keyboard." I said, "Look, I'm not drinking that stuff." I remember coming out of his place steaming, and that's some serious drinking that goes on there.
So yeah, Hank and Alexei aren't getting plastered at his apartment in the film, but the essence of what we see in the scene is true. They did indeed build a deep friendship over a common interest in programming and game design. And Hank did in fact have significant input in the final design of Tetris.
When Nintendo first made Tetris for Game Boy, the random number generator wasn't random. When I played it, I said the pieces are not coming out random. The pieces have to be random. So their program came out on Saturday, and I worked with them and fixed their random number generator. I mean, this is just before they mastered. So changing code like a couple of days before mastering is unheard of, but they did it because I said, no, there's no way that the Russians are going to accept a non-random random number generator.
Yeah.
Which was a bit of a bullshit story, but
as Hank said, these events are happening over a long period of time. You just need to condense it down to get the point across, and it works. But of course, there is a limit to how far you can stretch this, and I think they kind of hit that limit when it came to the car chase. The director admits in an interview that this was just falling back to adding a classic action movie trope to make the movie more exciting. He does try and justify it further by saying it was a metaphorical representation of the pressure they felt from the KGB and Maxwell's and everyone else, which after a certain point is just like bizarre from the perspective of like the documentary genre I'm in when making videos about Tetris events, because I can be creative with how I present the facts, but I do actually have to stick to the facts. I'm not just allowed to make something up out of thin air if it would be more dramatic or work better for the story, you know? It'd be like making a video about two Tetris players who faced off in the World Championships and including a metaphorical training montage of one of the players jogging, doing push-ups, lifting weights, and practicing in any way possible to take down their ultimate nemesis. Oh wait, that actually happened. And it was awesome. But okay, so ultimately Hank was satisfied with the film. And maybe that's easy for him to say. After all, he's the hero, he's the protagonist of the story. What about the people who weren't potentially portrayed so well? That was actually the primary fear of Claire Freedom Stein, the granddaughter of Robert Stein, one of the people Hank was battling to get Tetris rights. Claire actually wrote a comment on my trailer reaction saying she was dreading the film and was afraid he'd be portrayed as a villain without the chance to defend himself, as he just recently passed away in 2018. Stein is the main antagonist to Hank Rogers in the Story of Tetris video, so I too thought that's how it would be in the film. But after watching it, well, Robert Stein's not the villain, I can say that much. That would be the Maxwells and the corrupt KGB agent. Honestly, Stein comes across better in the film than the Internet Historian's video, because here, the crux of why the Soviets start to get mad at him is that he's not giving any royalty payments on his original Tetris licensing deal. But the movie adds a conversation between Stein and the Maxwells where he says he literally can't give any royalty payments to the Soviets because the Maxwell's company Mirsoft that he relicensed it through isn't giving him any royalty payments. So the true fault lies with the Maxwells, not with Stein. There's even a scene where Stein punches Kevin Maxwell in the face, which his granddaughter clarified after watching the film that no, he never did that, but OMG, I bet he would have loved to. That's freaking great, getting to watch a film where your grandfather sucker punches the guy who screwed him over in life. Surprisingly, the real Kevin Maxwell actually read the script before the movie was made, and he's not portrayed well at all. He's a spoiled, arrogant brat in the film. And his reaction was, the script's fair, but my dad, he was actually even worse. Which, you know, given that Robert Maxwell was part of one of the biggest corporate fraud schemes ever, he's a pretty acceptable target. Honestly, to me, the person who might have come across the worst in the film compared to how they were in real life is perhaps Hank Rogers himself. Taking the story the movie portrays at face value, he's portrayed as honest and good at heart, sure, but he also comes across as incredibly naive and reckless, gambling his family's company and home on getting a licensing deal with Tetris in a situation he doesn't fully understand. And unsurprisingly, it doesn't work out at first. So he has to go to the Soviet Union where he puts himself and his family members' lives in danger in order to fix it and gets lucky as heck that it all works out. But of course, a lot of these details aren't accurate to real life. A scene where people from the Russian embassy threatened Hank's wife in their home never happened. Neither did Hank getting beat up in an alleyway. Some moments where he barges in brashly to situations in the film, he was a lot more intelligent and measured about in real life. In the film, he lies his way into getting a meeting with the president of Nintendo to pitch him Tetris, whereas in real life, he first faxed a proposal to Nintendo to make a computer version of Go and immediately connected with the president over a mutual love of the game. Then he specifically set up meetings at the end of the workday so that he could play Go with the president after work and build up a personal connection, which helped him a ton when eventually pitching Tetris. These are the kinds of exceptional people skills that likely got Hank to where he is today and don't come across as much in the film. But the financial situation? Hank admits it was even worse in real life, with all of his in-laws' property on the line with the bank loan as well. I'm glad it worked out, Hank. So finally, number 3, is the film good? Would I recommend it? Yeah, I would. Obviously, it's not something you would ever cite as an exact factual source for a lot of the details, both big and small, but it's a quality film that adds a lot of emotion and historical depth to a simple game, and is very accessible to people who know nothing about Tetris, which is great. If it can introduce a few more people to the Tetris community, I count that as a success. Overall, the intended meaning of the film is a good one. Hank Rogers puts it this way.
What I hope people take away from this is that friendship trumps ideology. We are still friends, no matter what happens in our respective countries. So the ideology and the government, and they can just all go take a hike. Humans are humans. At the end of the day, we can all be friends.
And how's the original creator himself feel about it?
I feel very proud of my game, you know. This is a movie about Tetris, and the fact that they take the most important moment of the business life of my game is so touching for me. Finally, the very small kind of stuff now, it's on the screen, it's in a big culture. That makes me really proud.
The film is streaming on Apple TV Plus if you want to check it out, and if you want to get into competitive classic Tetris, there's tons of videos of the best players in the world on the Classic Tetris and Classic Tetris Monthly YouTube channels worth checking out. And if you just want to see the highlights, Line Spin Media is a great place to start. I'll have links to those channels on screen. Thanks for watching.